Hello, everyone. Welcome to JIVINITI, where we connect the dots between public and planetary health. I have a very special guest joining us today to speak about decolonizing environmental activism. Nikki Sanchez is a Pipil, an Irish-Scottish academic, an Indigenous media maker, TEDx speaker, environmental activist, and director of Decolonize Together. Please join me in welcoming Nikki. Alrighty, I have sent the invite. Okay. Hello.
Yeah, Pena, good morning.
Good afternoon. How are you, Nikki?
I'm good. I'm guessing we're in different time zones just from that response. You're the first human other than my family that I've talked to yet today. So good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon. I am so grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us on JIVINITI. How are you doing today?
You know, I'll be real. It is January. I can hear my dog coming down the stairs right now. Hi, buddy. It's January on the West Coast, and it's been really gray and really rainy. So every day I'm trying to find a different strategy for, buoyancy of spirit and just even taking care of my basic nutritional needs, because this is a tough time of year. And of course, in a colonial system, we don't get to have the rest and modified schedule that we normally would if we were living in harmony with our land and with our seasons. So trying to find the balance, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely, you speak truth. It is cold and rainy here too on the East Coast. I'm based out of Rhode Island, and I totally resonate with kind of just jumping back into work, and rather than finding that natural rhythm and flow with the earth and the seasons. So yeah, I'm grateful that for you to make time to speak to us today, and I'm very excited to learn more about your story in environmental activism, Indigenous activism. Could you share with us a little bit about what inspires you to do this work?
Yeah, that's a question that is it's a question that for me, I don't know how to be any other way. The reality of my life, I have a Pipil dad. Our homelands on my paternal side are Cuscatlan, which are now colonially known as El Salvador. And I have a settler Canadian mom of Irish and Scottish lineage, and she was down in Central America in solidarity and allyship, doing journalism and revolutionary work during a time where there was a genocide occurring in my paternal homelands. And so both my parents have been hugely involved in a justice movement since far before I was born. And so I was born into that. And then especially, coming to be here onto Salish territories as an Indigenous person, not on my own homelands, on stolen lands within the colonial, Empire of Canada. I've just always had a really acute awareness about inequity, about systemic racism, and about, you know, the ways that an Indigenous ontology really is not, it is not conducive to assimilation within capitalism and patriarchal and colonial thinking. And I guess one other thing that I really want to say is when I came to Canada, I lived in a Metrokeetan co-op, which was a co-op that was there primarily to support refugee families who just landed here in Coast Salish territories, as well as to redistribute wealth. So Canadian families who lived there would pay higher amounts based on their salaries, which would subsidize the refugee families. And so I got to grow up with this incredible mosaic of like Zulu, you know, Dedusa. My best friend was Zulu from South Africa, and they'd come from the Soweto refugee camp, with incredible Ethiopians and Somalians, with Mapuches from Chile. And so having that diversity of role model and family and love around me, you know, has always made me really acutely aware that we are so rich as human beings, and we have so much knowledge to draw on and so much beautiful culture. And yet we're in this monolithic, all-consuming capitalist colonial reality, and it's stealing everything of value. It's stealing everything that gives us life, and so it just doesn't make any sense. So I can't really go along with it.
Wow, mosaic is such a fitting word and a beautiful word to describe such a diverse and intersectional upbringing. So your work is rooted really in decolonization, Indigenous resurgence. Tell me a little bit more about the work that you're doing right now. And also, could you define for us what is decolonization and Indigenous resurgence? What does it mean to you?
Okay, I'm like two questions.
Yeah.
So the first question, just around the work that I'm doing right now, like today I'm writing an article about the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion that would be going through Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam lands. And I'm talking about matriarchy from the coastal First Nations and from the Southern resident Orcas, and how that lineage of intergenerational resistance and land defense is so essential to listen to in a time of climate crisis. I'm also going to be guest lecturing in a class, and that, yeah, my world is pretty eclectic in terms of the work that I do. I try to really create opportunities for myself to be able to support the things that I most believe in, and also manage to pay the rent. So it always looks a little bit different. I actually, like, my ring light is currently resting on my book, which I came out in 2020, which was an anthology of the coastal resident orcas. I have a really big affinity with them because for my whole 20s, I worked as a wilderness guide in Clayoquot Sound in Nuu-chah-nulth territories, and so got the incredible privilege of working really closely with both orcas, kakowin, and humpbacks, and gray whales, and all kinds of other beautiful creatures. So I really, everything from media to journalism and writing to advocacy. I run a collective called Decolonize Together that offers support, auditing, training, coaching, curriculum development, program design for decolonization and anti-racism. So that's a little bit. I also have a dog who you guys might have heard a second ago, who it brings a lot of joy and light to my life. So yeah, that's what I'm up to, and defining decolonization and Indigenous resurgence. So decolonization, I used to have a bumper sticker that said decolonize on my old car, and my ex-boyfriend's neighbor came out one day when he was working on the yard and was like, is this about colon removal?
Oh, wow.
Decolonize, no, decolonize. So, I mean, decolonization is a huge kind of breadth of paradigm. However, the way that I would explain it most simply is to really, when we take stock at this time in history about our own identities, our societies, our economies, and everything, we can see a historic reality that began around 500 years ago with the onset of colonization. And part of that, the forces that are woven and inextricable from colonization are patriarchy, racism, and capitalism. And so those forces have worked on pretty much every Indigenous homeland around the world. There's almost no corner of the earth that has been left unharmed by colonization. And so when I'm talking about decolonization, I'm thinking about that massive wheel of extraction, of oppression, of sexism, of harm, of genocide, of extractivism from the earth. Hey, Danielle, I can hear you. Please don't swear. And so like looking at all of those forces, I think about them as like a really big wheel. And decolonization for me is like, what can we do to put spokes in that wheel to slow down that process, right? So we can stop the harm. We're not talking about reconciliation yet. We're not talking about restoration yet. We're not talking about indigenization yet. We're just talking about how do we right now, what can we do today to begin to stop those forces of harm. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I think about decolonization. Decolonization is not enough. Mm-hmm. It's the very first step, but it's where we are right now. So that's why I really focus all the work that I do from a decolonial approach in hoping that you know, the ones who are younger than me, the ones that are coming up, that will clear the space for them to do the work of healing, of restoration, of cultural revitalization, of reclaiming sovereignty, all of that. And so then the other one you asked me to find was Indigenous resurgence. Yeah, and so that's a perfect setup, because I think Indigenous resurgence is what becomes possible when decolonization has been enacted. So when colonial arms of harm and extraction and exploitation are removed, Indigenous resurgence is possible because communities can have their own sovereignty and do the work that they want to be doing, live in the way that they want to be doing, carrying out the economic governance systems that are true to who they are and that aren't imposed by a colonial oppressor.
Right. Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for those definitions. Really helpful to help frame your work. And going back to a little bit of what Decolonize Together, the mission, the essence of your work, why do you believe that decolonization is for everyone, and how can people decolonize together?
Yeah, so these are like the real soft questions first thing in the morning.
I know.
So I think the theme decolonization is for everyone was really important for me when I was asked to give a TED talk, because what I'd seen my whole life around like kind of any form of anti-racism was very much around like still extractivism, right? So like, we're going to be anti-racist, like we're going to learn Black History Month, or we're going to take from the communities that we've been taking from all this time, but we're going to do it in a positive way and call that equity and call that diversity. And so often, like, Indigenous people get called Indigenous people, Chinese people get called Chinese people, Black people get called Black people. But when you say white people, literally, like, people act as though you've just like insulted their mother. And it's like, first of all, whiteness is a false category. There is no white Whitelandia. Caucasian, the Caucasus Mountains are actually a specific mountain region that connects Russia to Asia. And so unless your descendancy comes from there, you are not Caucasian. And so we have like millions of people running around North America thinking that they're Caucasian because nobody's ever asked them who they are and where they're from. And that's such a big part of colonization. If we know who we are and where we come from, we don't get to occupy other people's lands without thinking about that. We don't get to feel entitled to that which is stolen if we also know who we are and where we come from. And so for me, that notion that decolonization is for everyone is a really euphemistic way of saying white people, this is your work. The work of indigenization is for Indigenous people to do. The work of Black sovereignty is for Black people to do. And instead, what's been happening is that appropriation has been, named or passed over as diversity or anti-racism. No, deal with your history. Like, be honest about your intergenerational wealth that's been a direct outcome of genocidal policy, theft, and harm. And pick up that work, because ultimately those you don't need to go help Africa when you stop a global economy that's been extracting from that very rich and very diverse continent for hundreds of years, right? It's like, let's put back what you've stolen and then deal with healing your own people and your own communities so that the rest of us can do the same.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. So what is decolonizing together to bridge those gaps, making it more accessible and understandable for white people to join the conversation, to be held accountable, to educate themselves on decolonization?
Yeah, so one thing, like the name Decolonize Together really comes from the fact that when we talk about decolonization, although decolonization, I think for a lot of people has the connotation that it's about indigeneity, when we look at the roots of colonization, the fuels that allowed for that process to happen on a global basis were the theft of African people from their homelands, and then the thefts and occupation and genocide of Indigenous people. You know, so we cannot say decolonization without talking both about Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty. Those things can never be separated. And if anyone ever tells you that you can enact justice for one without the other, you can walk away right there and save yourself some time, because ultimately the roots of these forms of colonial oppression are tied. And so that name Decolonize Together is really trying to call in the reality that we actually need, you know, we need all hands on deck for this work. One of my big teachings is that medicine is for everyone. And as much as sometimes I want to be really protective and I, feel like so much has been taken and so I don't want to give everything, what I realize is that if I just work to heal the people I love, my community, the lands I love, but everything around us is sick, we will never be able to be well. And so we really need to do this work of healing together, because as we've seen, throughout our history in Turtle Island, you can't have one community that's thriving and have communities and lands suffering all around them and not have it have an impact. For us to be well, we need to be well together. We need to rise together and we need to heal together.
That is very powerful, Nikki. Thank you for that. This is actually what JIVINITI does, is we connect dots between public and planetary health. And like you said, for one community to thrive means that it's very important for all communities to thrive. So something that I wanted to talk a little bit about is your work as a media maker. And so you are a Indigenous media maker, documentarian, author. Can you tell us a little bit about the role of media in perpetuating certain narratives about Indigenous people or minority groups? How does your work help people unlearn stereotypes and misinformation? So those are two different questions, but I'd first love to know a little bit about, in your experience, what kind of narratives are being perpetuated, and then how can we dispel these narratives?
For sure. One thing I want to say is, honestly, like for everyone who's listening, I'm guessing we're all media makers. Social media the landscape has changed so much in the past 15 years. It's incredible. We're all media creators at this point. And I also just want to I feel really honored and really fortunate to have been able to be part of the projects that I've been a part of. But I don't have any formal training. And, I got to be author of a book, but I, don't have formal training. That I got to help make a documentary film series that, and so I just really want to, I think, one of the ways that colonization has worked for so long is making these spaces intentionally exclusionary. And so I just want to dismantle those titles a little bit to put us all on equal footing, because everything that I've done, no matter, what your background is and where you're starting from listening to this conversation, you could absolutely, create your own book, make your, work with people to make a documentary film series, do a podcast. Like, we've got this, we have these tools now, and it's so important at this time that we use those tools to take our voices back. So that's one. Number two, the stereotypes that we see represented in media, this is so big. And especially in a globalized world, especially in a world where our youth are consuming media pretty much from day one. And for people of color, for Indigenous people, for people who don't conform to cisgendered and heteronormative norms, so often what we see when we're trying to find ourselves reflected in the media that we have access to is so profoundly harmful. Duncan McHugh, who is an Indigenous writer and journalist in Canada, he has an article called "The 4Ds of Indigenous Representation," and they are dancing, drumming, drunken, and dead. And that's, he talks about, like, for Indigenous people to be in the media, they have to be doing one of these 4Ds. And unfortunately, up until recently, that has been really, really true. Like I said earlier, I have mixed heritage. I have a Pipil dad. I have a settler Canadian mom. My mom is really blonde and blue-eyed. And so I was raised by a single mom. So I didn't ever see anyone in my home who looked like me. And I was often, mistaken for not being her child. And so I really sought to find myself in media because I wanted to see myself reflected. And I'm so excited that this is changing. And I'm so excited that I've gotten to be, in a very small way, a part of that change. But up until very recently, if we wanted to find ourselves represented in media, those stereotypes that were offered to us about who we are essentially gave us the message that, one, if we're not represented, we're not valuable enough to be included. We don't even, warrant a mention. And two, if we are, we're inherently dysfunctional, we're inherently impoverished, we're inherently suffering, all of these things. And so specifically for me, coming from Cuscatlan, my homelands, which are now are known colonially as El Salvador, the only time I have ever heard or seen Salvadorans represented in mainstream media is as maids or as gang members. That's it. And I'm so, yes, in Visualize is talking about Dr. McHugh's 4Ds. Thank you they put the link. I really appreciate that as well. But for me, it's like, that hurts. It hurts every single time I hear that, single time I see that, it still hurts me. And I am committed in my lifetime to ensuring that there's representations of Salvadorans, especially Indigenous Salvadorans, where we are thriving and we are brilliant and we are succeeding and we are gifted and we are creative and all of those things, because all of our people are. That is who we have always been. We have been abundant. We have been thriving. And it's only from this process of colonization, as well as the representation of colonialism stories about us, that we come to believe something else.
Wow, that was incredible. Yes, absolutely. Your work works to dispel these narratives. And what other narrative, what way we correct these media misconceptions? What would you like to share? What narrative would you like to share within your work?
Yeah, I mean, everyone start creating your own media, and work together to create media. There is, I feel really excited right now because there's so much incredible content that's being made, streaming. I said, for folks, just thinking about the way that previously media had to be scrutinized in order to get made. It had to go through a network, and then it only had, it's like you're competing for a slot. So at 8 p.m., you're competing with, 15 other channels for what's on. So you have to get as many viewers as possible. So constantly media was being made that capitulated to dominant societal values, which meant it was cis, it was heteronormative, it was nuclear, it was white, it was all of these things that aligned with the narratives of the American dream and capitalism. And now that streaming services exist, you're not pitting content in competition with each other. People can watch whatever they want, whenever they want. And because of that, there's been this amazing bloom of profoundly diverse and incredible media, both more indromative, entertainment media, as well as documentary and educational content. So there's so much, and I'm always looking for more. So what I would love is for everyone who's listening right now, what is your favorite piece of liberatory or decolonial media? Because I will screenshot it and take it from my list. I can share some of mine. Reservation Dogs is one that's so incredible, and also anything by Sterling Harjo is amazing, and Taika Waititi, their content has been incredible, but it's so excited now to see them with a series. And Insecure is one that I absolutely love. Oh gosh, I'm they're all piling up in my head, but
Send him
Yeah,
later.
one of the films that I like felt really, really excited about because I felt like it was genre creating was Get Out. Just in terms of the ways in which, and this is the thing that's so exciting for me about diversifying media and equalizing access to media creation, is that we literally, if you think about all the media that's been created up until now, the vast majority, over 90% of it, has been made by white English speaking men.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we've heard a gazillion stories told by the same perspective again. And like, honestly, I'm just bored. I'm bored. And so it's
Me
so
too.
cool. Yeah, it's so cool when you give a camera and you give that capacity, or not even give, but when people take the camera, what is created? It is like
Mm-hmm.
it's such an exciting opportunity for our minds and our awarenesses and our worldviews to be expanded. And so for me, I'm always so excited to see how people tell their stories, how they see the world. It's such a gift to be able to see through the eyes of others.
Absolutely. And I'd like to add that my favorite media, decolonial media, is Rise on VICELAND. And I would love for you to share a little bit. I know that we're running out of time, but I'd love to hear from you a little bit about that initiative, and then also plug in your new book that's out, Spirits of the Coast, Orcas in Science, Art and History, all the diverse voices that you brought together in putting together this book about magic, myth, and ecology of orcas. So it's just such an incredible initiative that you have. So is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners before we go?
Yeah, there's 10. One is, if issues of decolonization, anti-racism, and equity are important to you, I'd really encourage you to follow Indigenous Peoples Movement. They are an incredible organization collective that I'm part of that represents Indigenous and Black people from all over the world. And if these issues are important to you and you want to support them, that's a really, really good way to stay looped in and stay connected. The other thing I would say is, whoever you are, wherever you are, make sure you know whose homelands you're residing on. Make sure you know your own, the own story of your family, of your history, of how you came to be here. And one of the things, obviously there is some heavy lifting when we do the work of decolonization, but there's also a ton of liberation and a ton of healing. And when we really endeavor to know our own stories and the stories of the places that we live, we start to see how we're all so profoundly interconnected. And that, for me, that process has been so growth inducing, so
Right.
compassion inducing, and I felt my sense of family just really, really blossom. Sorry, can I cut you off?
Oh, no, not at all. I just wanted to add that I think it's very liberating to know that we're all interconnected, and to understand our history, culture, and people is so important. So you bring together such important points of connection, connecting back to the earth, connecting back to our ancestry, taking ownership and accountability for decolonizing and decolonizing together, because this is a movement for everyone. So,
My
uh,
little homie is here too.
oh my God.
He's been here the whole time.
Oh, what's his name?
His name is Whitwalk, which means warrior. And I think too, like, this is another thing, and that's why I was so excited to write the Orca book, is like, when we talk about decolonization, it means we also have to stop just thinking about our human selves and our human relations, and we have to really think about all aspects of creation that enable us to be alive, and that includes our non-human family and our non-human friends.
Absolutely. Yes, that deeply resonates. We do a lot of work at JIVINITI around anti-speciesism and bringing together concepts of even decolonizing animals, having this understanding of connection between public, animal, environmental, planetary health. So that is so beautiful, and such a beautiful message you've shared. So thank you
I
so
love that. That's so awesome. The work that you are doing is so phenomenal. I feel really happy to have this conversation with you, and thank you so much to everyone who's joined. The other thing I would say for folks who are like, you're here, you've been doing the work, you understand what you need to do, and you're trying in your own communities and home places to make good things happen, and you're constantly being asked to explain these concepts. It's exhausting. It's a lot of labor. That's honestly, the reason that I wrote the TED Talk the way that I did was to be like, let's just do this once, and then nobody has to do it again, and then we can all get busy doing the work that we, you know, what we're trying to build, the ways that we're trying to heal ourselves and each other. So that Decolonization is for everyone TED Talk is on YouTube. Like, just, you don't have to take your time to do emotional labor for people. Just send them the link. Like, it's seriously, like, that was my hope, was like, okay, if I can do one thing for my brothers and sisters, I just hope that they don't, you know, they don't have to explain this again and again and again and try to convince people. It's not your work at all. The resources are out there. If you go, my collective is Decolonize Together, so decolonizetogether.com. You can reach out to us for resources. We have a ton of them, and just, you know, always really, really care for yourself in terms of, like, you've got such important work to be doing. It's so important that we honor our own boundaries, and we don't. I was really good for a really long time at giving all my energy away to try to educate other people, but there's been so much good work done, and more every day around that. So yeah, those are some resources I offer to you if that's something that you're working with.
Yes, thank you so much, Nikki. Yes, resources are available. The work has been done. Follow us on JIVINITI to learn more about public and planetary health. Stay up to date on the Indigenous peoples movement. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nikki.
Yeah, I'm so pleasured to be here. Whitlock's really glad that he got to be on Instagram Live too.
Bye.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.